steadfastcigars.com.
livingheritage.homeschool.com.
You guys have a busy day going on. I have a busy day going on today. We don't typically do these chats like, midweek and kind of off the cuff like we're doing. But this has been, I think, a tumultuous week for many Christians. And I won't belabor that point. Obviously, we had, although I think the incident is 2.5 weeks old at this point, there was footage that came out and was released of that young lady who was attacked on the Charlotte train, Charlotte bus. And it was horrifying on a great many levels. I think the picture of her collapsing onto the floor in that tearful state and seeing people's calloused expressions to her did something to a lot of us. When you behold evil, and I think Scripture speaks about this in many places. When you behold evil and actually see the grotesqueness of it, it does something more than if you just read a news headline, which is part of the power of video like that. But then yesterday, we were again kind of thrown into a news cycle when Charlie Kirk was shot and murdered speaking at an engagement event that was on a university campus here in America, which is, again, it's horrifying on many levels, right? You have political discourse, which should be kind of guarded and accepted, having differing viewpoints. You also have a university campus that's supposed to be kind of promulgating this sort of dialogue and these sort of interactions. But you also just have the specter of assassinations with high-powered rifles becoming not commonplace, but at least something that doesn't shock us as much as I think it would have in years past. So with all of those things being said, there's a lot of Christian dialogue that's going on about these things. One thing that I've encouraged our church, and I know you men work within church contexts and serve with God's people kind of on the ground, so to speak, or in the pew. I've encouraged our people. I don't think we have to be pundits that are equipped to engage with everything that comes through our news cycle, but I also don't want our people thinking that God's word does not address these sort of things and do it clearly. God says much that I think we can bring to bear on these sort of situations. So I'm not sure of the exact lead in, but how about let's just start talking about maybe justice, and we could start talking about maybe what we can think and encourage others to think as Christians. Again, this is brief form. We're giving some introductory remarks, but how can we think of God's justice in a time like this? And let me preface it, and I'll kick it off to whichever one of you would like to go. But let me preface it by saying I've seen many Christians say that we ought to be in prayer, and I say yes and amen. I've seen many Christians say that we should weep with those who weep, mourn with those who mourn. And again, yes and amen. I think there's many of those things, but that's not to the neglect, I think, of us calling for justice and pursuing justice as Christians. So help me think about this one, guys.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of gets into some of the other discourse with politics in the Christian world right now, is that there is a mechanism in our world for justice that God has instituted, and that's the civil magistrate. That's their job. That's why we're supposed to pray for them. And when they fail to uphold that, that's when the prophetic voice of the church is supposed to rebuke them, and we're supposed to be involved in seeing them be more faithful to upholding righteousness and whatever land the magistrate is. And certainly in our country, there seems to be a big divide growing in terms of lawlessness or softness on law and order, and that's probably a part of why we're seeing a growing amount of kind of these heinous news stories. I mean, it's not new. It's been going on for decades, but it seems like the fire is getting hotter, and so there's proper means. So that also tells us that the Lord will take care of justice. Vengeance is mine. We're supposed to not necessarily take things into our own hands in some sort of vigilante justice way. I wouldn't be shocked if that becomes more common in the broader culture. I mean, that's what's happening now. That's what these assassinations are. People are saying, I hate this person. They're a threat to me or the society. So they're just taking it into their own hands.
Which, John, can
And
I jump in there? By the way,
yeah,
what was interesting to me, so I didn't follow Charlie Kirk very closely. I'd seen a couple of his clips on YouTube or on social media or whatever, and those kind of like debate formats, and he's presenting things to college students or professors or whoever. But apparently, one of the things that Charlie Kirk was known for was being rather, I don't know the word to use. He would actively seek out and engage with those on the other side of the aisle, specifically for the debate and the discussion. In other words, he wasn't somebody standing back and just kind of saying, those people over there aren't even worth talking to. He was actually seeking them out and then going to their. I mean, this was on a college campus. He was going to their stomping grounds, so to speak, and engaging the debate. I think that's one of the things that made this one of the many things that made this so gut wrenching was to see somebody doing that. And then meeting what he met on that campus as you were describing. Does that make sense?
yeah, and there's tons of his videos going around right now. One of them is people ask him why is he doing this, and I said when people stop talking, they turn to violence. And so, I mean, literally, that was what he was about: is trying to make people have the hard conversations, engaging with people on their ideas, and those people might end up looking foolish because they believe in foolish ideas, and then that it certainly enrages some types of people. So yeah, to me, the real hard part with this one, I mean, so whatever timeline you want to take, the last year, we could start at Donald Trump. You have the CEO of United Healthcare. We have the school shooting recently in Minneapolis at a Christian school. Then we have the Ukrainian immigrant murdered for presumably no reason, perhaps related to race on a public transit, and now this. But Charlie Kirk is probably the most close identification for conservative Christians in America. He wasn't even a radical in a lot of ways, right? I mean, he certainly has an alignment with the Republican Party in that, but about 50% of his videos are just Christian apologetics. Talking about why he believes in the resurrection or the Bible or all these types of things. And so the left-right divide is one thing, but there seems to be coming more into focus between the Christian school shootings. I mean, there was the other one down in Nashville that is bringing it closer to home for the church, that any given church, any given event is potentially the same scenario. Any school, somebody who views Christianity, conservative Christianity, as being the enemy,
And it's the
and is
Christian
not
it's the
restrained.
Christian thing, John, that I find this is what's difficult about the situation. There's two things I know I just talked all over you. I apologize, but
It's good.
there's two things you're hitting on that I think are important. Number one, there's a clear animus toward Christians that is popping up in a lot of these. So you could talk about school shootings and what people literally write, not only in their manifesto, but on the guns that they use in the perpetration of these horrific events. Like these aren't things we have to guess about. In many of these circumstances, you can see. Now, when this Charlie Kirk thing happened, for example, we haven't heard anything about the perpetrator or anything along those lines, but you did hear a lot of news organizations in the immediate aftermath, and they said he brought it upon himself. And then I heard them saying views that he had propagated, and I thought to myself, that sounds an awful lot like the views of most every pastor I know, including myself. Many of these views are just mainline Christian views. That's a difficult thing for Christians, I think, number one, to reckon with. But I think the second thing is, and this is where I wanted to kick it mainly to George here in a second too, because George, I know you have experience with some of these things. It reveals there's a rift going on that's a little more complicated maybe than two, it's certainly more complicated than political parties perhaps. But there's a certain rift going on where you have people who flew Ukrainian flags on their homes and they had them in their social media bios, and yet when a Ukrainian immigrant is butchered, they had nothing to say. And I'm not saying everybody has to speak out on every event, But that's strange to have that just noted silence in that regard. You have people who are very outspoken about First Amendment rights and the fact that we can speak and we can even protest and we can even, they would say, block roadways and all the things we've heard over recent years. And yet when one man comes on a university campus and says something that is contrary to kind of the public zeitgeist of that day, they see no issue with him being executed in broad daylight, and they have no words of condemnation. Those are the divides that I find very interesting. It's almost as if many people who speak about empathy and justice and all of those things, they don't actually believe those things. Those are foils, very thin foils for something else that's going on under the surface of it. But George, help me out here.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't use the word, but the hypocrisy of it is evident. I mean, I on my Facebook page, I put something about the school shooting a couple weeks ago, and I just had the rabid anti-gun people, come out in force. And it is interesting that this Ukrainian immigrant, Iryna, I know we tried to decide how to say her name. I wish we knew. She seemed like such a dear soul.
Mm.
The man that stabbed her to death was arrested, was it 14 or 18 times for violent
14
crimes?
previous convictions.
Yeah, including illegal gun possession convictions. And so here, like, I wanted to go back, but I just am so tired of people trying to debate me on gun control and say, well, you guys are the ones that have compassion. You're calling for compassion on this stabbing murderer who deserves biblical justice, which is the death penalty. And you're talking about gun control, but here this man, your judge, released this man on gun charges. And then he uses a knife to just have a random murder of this dear image bearer. It was horrifying how alone she was. And that's why watching, like people say, don't watch the video. No, I want you to watch the video. I want you to see her face, and I want you to see what this worldview does. And, I posted on my social media this quote from Francis Schaeffer that it comes from Christian Manifesto. He wrote in, I think, 1981, but it's built off of his book, How Then Shall We Live, or something to that effect, from the 70s. And everybody needs to read this. I mean, we're PCA and Presbyterian and cessationists, but he was prophetic in the safest way for us to be able to say that. But he talks about the secular humanistic worldview, materialism, and chance. And he talks about, right at the beginning of the book, how Christians, and he's saying, in the 70s and 80s, are guilty of this thing where we just view things in bits and pieces as opposed to a unified whole. And at the end of the book, he says this, because he's talking about what he viewed as a window in the country being still open and about to be shut for people who hold our worldview to be able to express it. He says, with the window open, we must try to roll back the results of the total worldview, which considers material and energy shaped by chance as the final reality. We must realize that this view will, with inevitable certainty, always bring forth results which are not only relativistic and not only wrong, but which will be inhuman, not only for other people, but for our children and grandchildren and spiritual children. And there's the covenant matters tie-in. But it will always bring forth what is inhuman, for with its false view of total reality, it not only does not have a basis for the uniqueness and dignity of the individual person, but is totally ignorant to what and who man is. And, when I see people actually celebrate the assassination of Charlie Kirk, who can only, any reasonable person, and I have seen reasonable people who disagree with me politically, like, call their own out for how they're treating this murder, because they recognize that, all Charlie was doing was giving dignity to people who were not, quite frankly, intellectually even on his level. And he would sit and dialogue with them in such a way. And if you ever notice how he did it, he'd ask questions. They would raise something, and he would ask them questions in a very sort of Socratic way, but not in a condescending way. And there were times where he got a little sharp. Obviously, he was constantly, people tried to bully him, and they just were, dealing on a level that he wasn't even on. But this is what's going on in our country. When you see that the chopping off of the genitals of young boys and the chopping off of breasts of young girls, of the murder of millions of babies are not only allowed and celebrated, but called a right. When the perpetrators of crimes are called the victims, when violent people are let free and innocent people are not allowed to defend themselves, then yeah, what do we think is going to happen in our country? And it's I was an engineer in the manufacturing world, and we had what was called statistical process control, where you're measuring a manufacturing process, and you're measuring it within certain like measurements, whether it's forces or distances or whatever of different components on a feature, and or on a product, and within a certain range, you're good. And then outside those range, there's a target range, there's a control range. But once you go beyond that, it may not get to catastrophic levels, but you're to shut the equipment down and fix something, because if you let it run long enough, it will get to catastrophic levels. And so people want to say, like, what went on in the subway at Charlotte or these school shootings, usually by now people that hold anti-Christian, anti-Imago Dei worldviews, or assassination attempt of Charlie Kirk because he poses an existential threat, which, by the way, he did pose an existential threat, because that's what this is. And I don't say that in violent terms, but there's two worldviews at play, and that's existential. But these are not isolated things. This is the fruit of a worldview, and there's always, of course, going to be outliers, but you allow these things to go unchecked for the benefit of either tolerance or multi whatever you want to say, and you're going to have this.
Well, and that's
good.
No, sorry, George. Just to piggyback on what you're saying, I feel like this is so. So I was a sociology major back in the good old days in college, and they would make much of the othering of those who you're opposed to or regard as your enemy. So the idea of the other was to essentially dehumanize somebody into you can think of like war in this regard. Like you were to look at the enemy's soldiers, and a lot of it was kind of a cope on your own part, but you were to look at the enemy's soldiers. These aren't actually even really people I could talk to, and it made warfare easier, but it also made times of peace a little bit more difficult. But the way my mind has been going through this, so like none of us are trying to like dehumanize anybody we disagree with. You've been very careful not to do that. However, one of the thoughts that's been going through my mind with this sort of thing, because these things don't come from nowhere. They certainly don't just come from. Anyway, I don't want to go down the gun control route, because that would distract the point of what I think we're aiming at today. But these things do arise from somewhere. So I put on the socials, which I'm not good at. I recommend everybody follow George and John on socials, and not me. But
John,
yeah, John for sure. But no, I put on there, a quote from Soren Kierkegaard, and Kierkegaard, who, again, don't agree with him on everything, but he did observe, he said, those things that kind of wear the hat of being something or wear the mask of being political will always reveal themselves to actually be religious endeavors. So things that appear as political movements, or you could even say worldviews, or the things you were just talking about, George, it appears non-religious, and we can talk about this sort of kind of pluralistic culture that we aim for, and yet those things actually have religious convictions. Now, underneath that, you have that impetus of, you mentioned Francis Schaeffer. I think you could look to Abraham Kuyper as well. Kuyper, famously, he said, in the end, there's only two options. There's Christianity or paganism. There's idols, or there is the living God. These are the choices that you will inevitably follow. I think it's thoroughly biblically defensible. You cannot follow a middle thing. There's always, First John makes this quite clear. You follow Christ, or you follow that which is opposed to him. Here's where the covenantal thinking comes in, is Isaiah, many, many years before Kuyper or us, the prophet Isaiah said there is a curse, he calls it a woe, but it's a curse upon those who call good evil and evil good. Many Christians, maybe Christians who are a bit more progressive in their thinking would say, well, I've never supported those things. I simply want to allow for them. I simply want to make space for them. I simply want to kind of coexist with them in a way that I'm supporting their existence or their continued preservation. But what you permit, you endorse. Whatever we
That's right.
allow, we're actually endorsing and supporting. If I was to come in tomorrow and say, "Hey, I think we should be able to at will commit atrocities against some, ethnic minority," I'm not calling for us to do it. I just want to allow space for us to do that. I think most people would rightly say, no, 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 to actually allow for that thing is to endorse that thing. I think the problem with this is if that's true, and I think it is, then biblically, when God says, woe, curse upon those who call good evil and evil good, when we allow for this sort of thing to happen because of our desire, our misguided desire for a religiously pluralistic landscape in the name of religious freedom, I think what we are actually encouraging is a curse of God upon a culture, a nation, however you want to frame it. But this actually brings the curse of God when we lift up things. You just ran through a litany of them, George. When we lift up the murder of the unborn in the womb, or the not yet born in the womb, image bearers of God, when we allow these things, we're actually bringing God's curse. And I don't think a lot of Christians have reckoned with that.
Well, that's Romans 1, Josh. I mean, Romans 1 is drawing upon the Isaiah passage that, that says, and it says, not only do they allow these things, but they celebrate them, right at the end, and what is it? What is Romans 1 holding out? The righteousness of God is revealed and the wrath of God is revealed. And the righteousness there is revealed in the context of the gospel, in that Christ pays the price for our sins, and we receive that by faith, because later Romans will say we've all sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and we can have his righteousness, not our own. But the wrath of God is revealed against all unrighteous and ungodliness of men. And so, yes, when pluralism becomes more important than truth, then you are a nation and a society under the judgment of God, and that's what we're seeing here. And I am woe to us. I am concerned for our country and nation and people and my kids and my grandkids and my great grandkids and great great grandkids. It's a sad state of affairs. But for some, the idol of pluralism is more important than the dignity of image bearers and the glory of God.
John, what do you got up there? Because I know one thing that we don't have a whole lot of time. In fact, this was my cutoff time, but I'm appreciating and enjoying this conversation. I'm not enjoying the content of, obviously this is a heavy thing we're talking about, but any thoughts from you? And specifically, I'm thinking toward for Christians. I think a lot of Christians are grappling with the complicated nature of our response to these sort of things. That you can love your enemies, for example, you can love even those who perpetrate horrific acts, yet you can also call for their justice, and those two things are not antithetical to one another. In fact, it would be antithetical to not call for their justice. Romans 12:9 tells us, let love be genuine. In other words, let it be actual love. And it defines that as hating that which is evil and loving that which is good, clinging tightly to it. So maybe thoughts on the justice of the situation?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things just come to mind. It's like be angry, but do not sin. Like you should be outraged. You should be upset. It should drive you to proper action. And that is going to look different in different people's lives, whether that's restraining evil, getting involved in, local things. But, we've recently in our church started singing through the Psalms in a new hymnal that has Psalms in it. And, when the imprecatory Psalms come up, it's shocking to sing. Because that's not what, typical, even traditional hymnody doesn't really have much edge on terms of, God crushing the wicked and breaking their teeth and, just very vivid, very strong language. And so, anytime we find ourselves in tragedy, sorrow, loss, whether or not there's injustice involved, right? We're supposed to cling to the Lord, seek his presence and pray and find our comfort and rest there. But that includes, especially in times like this, praying for the downfall of the wicked, that God would bring about these things. You talk about the curse. Everything we're seeing in our society is not outside of God's control. And it is evident of the cursing that we're bringing upon ourselves, whatever that might be. It might be generational things at play, not even just our modern manifestations of sin. And so, this is a real spiritual thing. People really want to make things about politics or morals or individuals, but there's right. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but powers and principalities, and the people that are doing these types of things are demonic, and that the way to overcome evil in that way, God is a spiritual battle. We need to be not unaware, not ignorant of that, and it doesn't mean we just hide and pray, right? We speak out. I mean, you think about what Charlie Kirk is doing. That was a spiritual battle. When Jesus walked around the world proclaiming the kingdom, his word enraged the demons. Just him speaking. And also his word cast them out. And so even the power of speaking truth in the midst of darkness in itself is an act of warfare. And I think that's, I've been thinking about this, like, what's the best thing you can do to honor Charlie Kirk? Go talk to people. Go do evangelism. Don't stop what he was doing. He died on the front lines of somebody who was speaking truth, Christian truth, to people who hated him, and he died for it. And he was doing what seems to be the right thing, right? I mean, he was of all the people, like, we have a spectrum of radical people that have, divergent views on all sorts of different things. He's like the most central evangelical, conservative guy. He was not an extremist, even within our own kind of religious circles. And so even a moderate could realize this: if you consider yourself a moderate, they want you dead too. And so if our day comes, what are we doing in that day? I think it's obviously tragic, but I bet it's almost prophetic and joyous that he died doing what he felt called to do.
Yeah.
He's a martyr. He's a true martyr.
Yeah. And I think it's also fair, and it's not this is not something partisan or divisive, or at least like, well, let me just say what I'm trying to say. When certain groups align themselves with darkness, that's not our fault as Christians. So in other words, it's not me being partisan and divisive to watch as they try to just simply observe a moment of silence for somebody who was shot and murdered in a public forum, and one party's constituents stood on the House floor and all with raucous, indignation prevented them from having a moment of silence. That's not me being divisive. That's me observing the divisiveness and the fallenness of a certain group. And I make no apologies. I don't think we as Christians should make any apologies for that. Nobody, because typically the pushback is, well, this isn't a time for divisiveness. This isn't a time to draw large chasms within the country. And to a certain extent, I understand what they're saying. Don't inflame ungodly passions. Don't cause people to hate their neighbor unnecessarily or anything like that. And yet, if there are large groups out there saying, this is good, this is just, we're happy that this atrocity has happened, and in fact, if they catch the man, that he should get off, the division's already been made, and it's not the responsibility or the onus resting upon the Christian. We're simply observing what has already happened. I think that's a biblical thing. Christ said that this sort of thing tends to divide light from darkness, and if there are large swaths of our population or political parties or social groups or whatever that might be who have aligned themselves with darkness, it will be exhibited in their works. We're told that that's the fruit of those sort of heart attitudes. So I say all that just to say we can be careful with the way we address those sort of things. We can also be clear-headed about the way we address those sort of things, and recognize that certain groups have in fact drawn lines in the sand that are quite troubling and quite offensive.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. There's an ideology, and it's with a group. And, the sad thing is it's the individual Christians that are, often confused about these things, and we need to love them through it too. But, you're going to know them by their fruits, and that's what we're starting to see. I know you got to go, Josh. One thing that's occurred to me, the last thing I kind of want to say on this is, young people, there's all this outrage about guys like Andrew Tate, or specifically about Andrew Tate. And I've talked to young men about him in strong terms. But, but he, a guy like Andrew Tate tapping into sort of a masculinity that is lacking and absent in our culture. Well, now you have a guy like Charlie Kirk who was doing it right, you know, and many of the same guys that I knew following a guy like Tate, and they would defend, it wasn't for the misogynistic things, but just the more sort of goal setting, be a man, physicality type stuff. Like they were also following Kirk and these young people, and uh, they're actually hurting over this. And
Yeah.
I know this because I have three teenagers, and they were all really dismayed over this. Like I never really followed this guy. I mean, I would see the clips, and mostly not the political clips, mostly him defending Christianity. I thought he was apologist, really. So I didn't realize the movement he had going on college campuses, and also the fact that my, ninth grade son, 11th grade daughter, and college age son are all discouraged by this. And it occurred to me, and John, you raised this, like in the last 12 months, my kids have seen live Donald Trump being tried to be assassinated, and now
And
through
shot.
social,
Still
yeah,
shot.
and shot, yeah. Yeah, oh, he was shot, and Charlie Kirk now actually being assassinated for what they believe, for what my kids believe. So, it's no longer rhetoric to say you can be killed for believing this, and Christians are persecuted for these things. Uh, and again, I'm not calling Donald Trump, the model of a Christian or anything, but like he is conservative. So for your conservative beliefs or your Christian beliefs, people now are being attempted to be killed for those things. And our young people are seeing that. And I think we need to shepherd them through this because this is real for them,
Yeah. John, any closing thoughts?
No, it's good. The only thing I really post about it is, Jesus' words, don't be surprised if the world hates you, because it hated me first. And so those words were always kind of hollow, I think, in our context, at least for my life. And they're starting, now the context starting to make more sense. The difficulty of following after Christ, saying true things in difficult circumstances, and even seeing hatred manifest in murder is it's sobering. It was a sobering day yesterday. So
Yeah.
be praying for the Kirk family. I mean, the guy's young, married, two little kids. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah. One of the illustrations I love because George, you brought up your kids. My kids are a little bit behind yours in age, but still trying to think of how to talk to my junior in high school about this sort of thing and those that are after. I was thinking, I believe it. Yeah, it was Robert Louis Stevenson. So, sickly kid. He was in bed for a lot of his early life. And this one description that he used one time, it just always stuck with me. I thought it was beautiful. He described the little lamplighters that would come along the street, and they would light the lamps. And so they're providing a light to the street. This is old time London, I think it was. Or was it continental New England? No, I think this was London. I'm exposing my ignorance. In any case, we'll soldier on. So he saw these lamplighters going along. They're lighting the lamps, and he described it having, kind of the poetic flair that he would exhibit later in life. He described it as them punching holes in the darkness. So the lamplighters would come along and punch holes in the darkness. I'm not even so much thinking of Charlie Kirk. I am thinking of the legacy that Christians have left, and what we need to encourage and stoke in the younger generation is that when things look quite dark, oftentimes it only takes a couple of lamplighters to encourage the others. But it's part of our task, and this is Christ's words, right? It's part of our task to punch holes in the darkness because we're indwelt and imbued with the light that shines, and the darkness has not overcome it. This is part of our job as Christians. So I think an encouragement for Christians in dark days, something I plan to share with my kids, is that it looks quite dark this week. It is heavy. I feel a weight. A spiritual weight this week. Those are the times when the lamplighters need to be about their business, punching holes in that darkness. But John, George, appreciate you guys. Thank you for jumping on short notice. But yeah, I hope this is encouraging. I hope this is helpful. There's much more on covenant theme I think we could have said about this, but maybe we can do some follow-ups in the coming days and weeks. So thank you guys, and yeah, God bless. Okay.